Well, hello and welcome to the first of our midweek messages during this strange time that we find ourselves in. If you've not met me before, my name's Chris Martin and I'm the team rector of the Golden Cap group of churches here in West Dorset. I wonder what you're like at doing nothing, or at least doing less than you're used to doing. I must confess that I'm finding it a bit of a struggle. And I think that's partly to do with the fact that we live in a world that seems to value busyness, but always doing as human beings. Busyness is worn as a badge of honour among some, in that competition of who's working the hardest, who's achieving the most, who's producing the best. And we can often fall into the trap of thinking that we need to be productive, we need to produce something that can be measured in order to be of worth in such a society. And time wasted is time when nothing is produced, and so idleness is often viewed with scorn. And then the coronavirus happened. And it's awful, and we know that some people, thankfully, are still working hard, busting a gut. Some risking their lives day by day to keep us safe, to care for the sick and the dying. And we know that families are unable to grieve together and mourn the loss of loved ones lost. And so whilst I'm mindful that there are those who are still working hard in service of others, and for which we should all be very grateful, I'm also aware that for the vast majority of the population, our experience is one of being stuck indoors, with much less to do than normal. And in that, I'm recognising something in myself, and in chatting with friends and colleagues, it seems that they're experiencing it too in these unusual and difficult times together. And what it is I'm noticing is that the lockdown that's been imposed upon us for good reason is causing me to slow down and to stop doing as much as I'm used to. I find myself less distracted, but to begin with, it's quite disorientating and disconcerting. I want to be doing something, I want to be achieving something, producing something, and I notice my mind is still very active. And I thought actually that prayer might become much easier with more time on my hands, but I'm actually finding that prayer is quite difficult. Perhaps you know what I mean. I suppose I'm realising that living hurriedly is a state of mind rather than the product of a full diary. And even with a diary that's much emptier at the moment, I still notice in myself that temptation to rush about from one thing to the next, even if only in my head. My wife laughed at me because we went out for our daily exercise to walk our dog Welly, and I insisted that we pick up the pace so that I could get back to deal with the jacket potatoes that were slowly baking in the oven. I'm so often in a rush. Is that true for you too? So if nothing else, the slowing down being imposed upon us may at least help us to stop doing for a while and learn to be still and know that I am God, as is written in Psalm 46 verse 10, to be still and know that I am God, to slow down, to live with more space in the soul, to pray more contemplatively, to become a human being instead of a human doing, to go indoors, both literally and metaphorically. But for some of us it's hard, and today I wanted to share with you something that I'm finding useful, but I share it with you as an absolute novice, a complete beginner in contemplative prayer. So I'm sure many of you have come across it already and will be way ahead of me here. And I learned it from an author that I like to read, the Franciscan priest Richard Rohr, and apparently he learned it from a Jewish rabbi. And it concerns a very simple practice using an ancient Hebrew name for God used by God's Old Testament people, the name Yahweh, spelled Y-A-H-W-E-H. Yahweh. And when this name appears in the Hebrew Old Testament, only the consonants are written, YHWH, and it translates into English Bibles as the word Lord, Lord, but in capital letters. So whenever you see the word Lord in capital letters in the Old Testament, it's a translation of this Hebrew word Yahweh. And in the conversation between Richard Rohr and the rabbi, if my memory serves me correctly, the rabbi explains that the vowels are omitted from the written word Yahweh so as to remind God's people that you can't possibly contain God within a single word or name. It's a reminder that when we try to talk about God or write about God, we can't ever adequately describe what we speak of or what we write of. How can we speak or write fully of the awesome mystery that is God? So, said this rabbi, that's why the vowels are omitted from the word Yahweh, to remind us that when we speak or write of God, we can never fully know what we're talking about. And that's a very good reminder to preachers. But there's more, because this rabbi goes on to say that the very name Yahweh is actually designed to replicate the sound of our breathing. Yah on the in-breath, way on the out-breath. So, and I love this because what that means is that the very first thing that we did when we came into the world was we whispered the name of God. And the very last thing that we'll do on this earth is we'll whisper the name of God. And every single moment in between, for as long as we're breathing, we whisper the name of God. So when prayer is difficult, I find it helpful to remember that literally to breathe is to pray. To breathe is to speak God's name over and over. So we may not be able to speak or write about God with absolute clarity, but we can breathe God. This is our gracious God who gives himself away. So it can be a helpful thing just to sit quietly, not to try and achieve anything, but just to sit and to focus on our breathing, being aware that as we breathe, we are whispering the name of God, calling forth and communing with the God whose breath, whose spirit is within us. I usually find that even just after a few seconds of doing this, concentrating on my breathing, that my mind wanders onto other things like jacket potatoes probably, or all the things I'm apparently not achieving by sitting still. But if we can be kind to ourselves and not judge ourselves when this happens, but instead just return our focus to our breath when we become aware of having wandered off, the mind eventually learns to slow down and we're able to be still and know that I am God. So if you're watching this, whether or not you call yourself a Christian or spiritual or religious, why not just spend a few minutes in quiet now, just breathing, just whispering one of those ancient names of God. And I'd really love to know what your experience is as you persevere with that. So do let me know. Margaret Trafford, our wonderful administrator, has included my email address in the message notifying you of this video. In this season of Easter, Jesus often appeared to his first disciples behind locked doors. So I'm praying that we might know a deeper sense of God's presence with us as we pray this way from behind our locked doors. So stay well, God bless you, and breathe.